Carbon burns in oxygen, produces CO2. And at this point in history, that's a foolish thing to do. 'Cause warming up the atmosphere brings jeopardy all around. The best thing you can do with coal is leave it in the ground. Leave it in the ground, oh, leave it in the ground. Deep beneath the earth where it never will be found. We analyse the data, the findings may astound. The best thing you can do with coal is leave it in the ground.
That was the scene at one of the Speaker's Corner protests held this summer at the site of the Conservative government's planned coal mine in Cumbria near Whitehaven. And that's the topic of today's programme. Hello and welcome to Rising Clyde, the Scottish Climate Justice Show. I'm Ian Bruce in Glasgow. And today we're very pleased to have with us one of the organisers of those protests, Allan Todd. Allan is joining us from Keswick. And Allan is a veteran climate justice campaigner in Extinction Rebellion and many other movements. And as I say, he's been one of the organisers of those Speaker's Corner protests. Allan, thank you so much for being with us. We're going to hear a little bit later from a couple of the activists at that protest in June. But first, maybe you could just bring us up to date. What is happening now with the protest movement and indeed with the Conservative government's plans for that coal mine?
Hi Ian, nice to see you again. There isn't an awful lot to report at the moment. Just as with the Tories' intention to issue these, 100 plus oil and gas licenses, and that remains in place. The same is true with their continued approval of a new coking coal mine in West Cumbria. And that's despite all of the sums that have been done that show how much CO2 is going to be released, about 9 million tonnes a year, and probably around about 220 million tonnes by the time it is planned to finish in 2049. And that's despite the fact that the UN, the International Energy Agency, and their own climate change committee have said that any new coal projects, as with new oil and gas projects, are incompatible with a livable climate. In other words, I suppose the summary is that the Tories intend to push ahead with yet more ecocidal energy policies.
There is some sort of process of appeal underway, is that right, Allan?
Yes, there is. Both Friends of the Earth nationally and South Lakes Action Against Climate Change, they lodged challenges to the new coal mine precisely on the basis that they said that the actual new CO2 emissions had not been properly considered when the approval was given. The cases should have been heard in the High Court starting on the 24th of October, but now that's been pushed into the long grass, probably to early 2024, because the Supreme Court, which just recently heard a legal challenge against the fracking for oil project in Surrey, it was the Wheeled Action Group took that challenge to them. It's heard the appeal, but it hasn't ruled. But what they have said just recently is because their judgment may have serious implications for the Cumbrian coal mine, therefore the High Court challenges that we've got, they can't be heard until they have announced their judgment. So it's all a question of sort of hanging fire now at the moment.
Explain to us a little bit how these Speaker's Corner things came about and how they work.
I suppose once I started to get involved in this, I went back to the time that I was involved in the anti-fracking campaigns at Preston New Road. And August 2017, I think, I began what became known as the Green Mondays, which is essentially exactly the same thing as these Speaker's Corners, which was trying to get as many sort of reputable names, well-known names, to come and say what was wrong with fracking, why fracking shouldn't be happening, why it needed to stop. And initially, the obvious reason for these kind of things, and that's the same with these Speakers' Corners events against the coal mine, is merely to raise the profile of the campaign by getting national speakers coming, to get the message out in the local area that these are the kind of jobs we could get if we got renewable energy, if we had home insulation and so on, and that the stuff that's coming out of West Cumbria mining, which is essentially an Australian hedge fund company, and the Tories that back it, where they're making promises about jobs and all this kind of stuff, is just not worth the paper it's written on. The West Cumbria mining itself has a history of, well, shall we say, being economical with the truth. One of their first claims was that this would be a green project because the coke that they would produce would actually stop the importation of coke that was coming into the UK for the UK steel industry. But that didn't last very long, because more or less as soon as they said it, the UK steel industry said, we don't want it, partly because there's too much sulfur in it, which was why the coal mine closed down decades ago, because it wasn't good coal, but mainly because they are rapidly decarbonising by moving it over to hydrogen. I mean, the government themselves are giving money to the UK steel industry to help them decarbonise. So they then had to backtrack and accept and admit that something like 85, 90+% of whatever they produce will be exported. And their second attempt was to say, well, it'll go to the EU. But that fell down because the EU is even further along the process of decarbonising the production of steel than we are in the UK. So in fact, it will end up in places like Turkey and the Philippines that are not that bothered about CO2 emissions. And so that's the initial purpose of these Speakers' Corners, and to bring people together to start talking after the speakers' events. What else can we do? How can we get together? Can we step it up? Can we involve more groups? What do we need to do in terms of campaigning within the very local area that it's in? But as we'll probably get to it later, there is also an ulterior motive, on my part anyway, as to what these Speakers' Corners are all about. And that does relate back to the anti-fracking campaign and the Green Mondays.
Let's just hear a moment from a couple of the actors we talked to at the Speakers' Corner at the end of June. We spoke to Tony Hill, he's from the South Lakes Extinction Rebellion group, and to Isabella Bridgman, who's a youth climate justice campaigner. She was one of the people who led the Fridays for Future school strikes in the region, and she told me a bit more about the plans for the mine.
So they're planning to build a deep coal mine which will be used to dig up coking coal to make steel. And the big argument that they're putting in favour is that this will bring 500 jobs to the local area. But it's also going to produce 400,000 tonnes of CO2 a year just from the site itself, and then the coal that it produces could contribute to upwards of 9 million tonnes of CO2 per year, which will have obviously a devastating impact upon the climate around the world.
Green jobs, as I am about closing this mine down.
I got involved with the school strikes in January or February 2019, just as Greta Thunberg was starting them. And then sort of via that I became aware of the mine just from talking to environmentally minded people on the street who said, oh, whilst you're here you should know they're trying to build a mine. So I think that kind of happened in conjunction, and definitely like the first few school strikes we had a sign saying no new coal mine, which attracted some sort of honks of agreement from passers-by and a couple of sort of confrontational conversations from older adults sometimes, which was a bit of a shock to us because we were 14 at the time, so having to sort of argue with these adults over whether we should have a new mine was a steep learning curve. But yeah, it was all sort of part of the same movement, I think.
You talked about the 500 jobs or something that this mine is. I mean, for young people in this area, I guess there's not a lot of work around. That's an attractive option, right?
Yeah, I mean, this area is very underfunded and deprived in terms of employment. So I think a lot of young people if they're able to, will move out of the area and sort of stay out of the area. But I think, there are far more sustainable options for jobs that could happen in the area. I think a report by Friends of the Earth found that about 9,000 jobs could be created across Cumbria in sustainable fields over the next few years. So I think young people here desperately do need those jobs, but there's far better ways to get those jobs than having apprenticeships in a mine and committing to that career.
Tony, how do you come across much sort of pressure within the community for the jobs, for the mine? How do you confront that?
I think the plain fact of the matter is that Cumbria is a two-tier society, two-tier county. Where I live is where the wealth resides, by and large, the Lake District National Park. The west coast of Cumbria has always been marginalised. It's been forgotten in the whole political process. We've got to combine both elements of Cumbria, the National Park and the west coast, and we can work together to produce that sustainable future for young people.
If you don't want young people here to look for jobs down a mine, and you don't want them to move away, as Isabella said, she probably will have to, what should the area be offering them?
Green, sustainable jobs. That's what we're trying to do in our small community, to retain young people. If we can give our young people, in fact everyone in our community, the ability to take that responsibility and ownership for as many facets of their life as possible, that's where you can retain the talent, the skills of everyone for the benefit of our own community. I live in South Cumbria in a village called Burneside, and what we're doing in Burneside I think can resonate up here. I can go into more detail, but back in 2015 we took the Conservative government on its word, basically the big society, whereas they were saying that communities and individuals should be taking more responsibility and power into their own hands. And through that we formed a coalition in our small village, our small community of 2,000 people, and we produced the vision for Burneside. And out of that vision, 3 of us set up a community interest company, Burneside Community Energy, which is producing green energy, which is developing rapidly, and in harness with expected new development in our village, we are going to produce, generate and supply green energy to new passive housing. Now, I think that message of empowerment, responsibility, taking ownership for your own community is the way forward, not just in my village, but here in Whitehaven and across the globe. We need to take ownership and responsibility for our lives to be sustainable and resilient.
But I think often the youth voice especially is missing in the coal mine campaign, so I know a lot of youth initiatives and campaigns are going on nationally, but not necessarily making that connection with the mine. So I've been involved with Teach the Future, which works on climate education and so on. But I think it's more important that we bring sort of young people towards this campaign especially. Because there hasn't been, I feel like I'm often sort of one of a few voices that are young on this campaign. But as you can see, here today, people are still going strong, they're still singing, there's still hope in the movement. So yeah, I think people are quite resilient, especially in the climate movement, and are used to having sort of defeat after defeat. So I think until that first digger drives onto the site, people will still be fighting and campaigning and retaining that hope for the legal appeals and whatever comes after that.
At the moment, I'm on a high. I'm full of optimism, and that's how I'm going to remain now.
The message from this the protest, is obviously the same as many others around the country and around the world. Leave it in the ground. We have to get rid of fossil fuels. But I'm just wondering how you see the Cumbria campaign fitting into that broader picture.
Well, I think Isabella it was who raised the point that at the moment in the wider campaigning, there doesn't seem to be much recognition of the fact of what's actually going possibly to happen in West Cumbria. Obviously, the issue of over 100 new oil and gas licenses is a big one. Just Stop Oil, with their campaigns, have put an awful lot of focus on the issue of oil. And again, one of the purposes of these speakers' corners is to try and get a wider recognition beyond Cumbria that, as well as stopping oil, we actually do need to stop coal as well, and that this is a project that should be stopped before it starts. I was interested to hear that in the two conversations that you recorded there with Isabella and Tony, that the issue of jobs came up. It's actually quite a complicated situation in West Cumbria. There is a need for jobs. It's an area that has basically been thrown onto the dust heap first of all by the Tories, and then by New Labour, just completely ignored it. There's an awful lot of poverty in some pockets in West Cumbria. There was a huge proportion of families living in fuel poverty before this current cost of living crisis. But in terms of the mine, there are, in fact, very few people now in Cumbria with the experience of working in a deep sea mine. The company themselves, West Cumbria Mining, they promised, and this is where you have to look for weasel words, isn't it? Up to 500 jobs. And they have promised that where possible, 80% of those will go to people living within 20 miles of the mine. But given the nature of the project that they'll be doing, where they need experienced people, almost certainly, as other projects around the world have shown, they will be bringing people in, putting them into temporary accommodation and so on, because the skills are actually not here. It's just what they do, isn't it? They always try to sell these kind of things. And I was glad that Isabella in particular talked about the campaign, what was it, for sustainability in Cumbria, the Cumbrian Action for Sustainability. They estimate that over a 15-year period, that with green energy jobs and a massive home insulation program for the whole of Cumbria, they would probably create around 9,000 jobs, which is in line with what the local government body did themselves not that long ago. And about 4,000 of those 9,000 jobs would actually be in West Cumbria, because there is so much to do with the housing. So that as I say, is what part of what these speakers' corners are all about. Getting the counter arguments out, getting on the table the kind of jobs and the kind of investments that we could have. And it'd be interesting to see if Angela Rayner now, with her new job for levelling up, is going to come and say something about the mine and do some levelling up in West Cumbria.
I'll ask you about that, because you mentioned earlier Labour Party policy as well. And as you know, here in Scotland, the Labour Party, the Scottish Labour Party, is trying to make some mileage of the fact that Keir Starmer has come out saying he's opposed to the 100 plus new licenses, not opposed to the existing ones, by the way.
No.
But what exactly do we know about Labour Party policy in relation to the Cumbria mine?
That's a very good question, Ian, and I don't know that I'm the right person to even begin to answer it. What it seems from my end here, and this is a personal opinion, not the views of the organisations that are involved in this anti-coal mine campaign. It seems almost like every day there is another little statement that slips out where they're actually watering down what were their original green pledges. it's almost like pledges is a word that should be struck from the dictionary, because pledges don't mean pledges at all. What they mean is a statement I've made a few months ago, and then I'll actually rip it up and come up with something different that isn't as good. So I don't know. We had a pause in August with the speakers' corners because of people going away on holiday. But, and this I think is one of the things that came out of the speakers' corners that we'd had, it didn't mean that the campaign against the coal mine came to an end. In fact, what we had in August was XR North Lakes and XR South Lakes, who've been very supportive of the campaign and providing speakers. They stepped up their involvement over the bank holiday weekend through a huge, big banner drop action across all of the main roads in Cumbria to greet all of the bank holiday tourists flocking into the Lake District. And it had a very clear slogan, which is no time for a coal mine. And that would have it got onto local news, which is something that we don't get very often from the speakers' corners, apart from when Chris Packham turns up. And it meant that an awful lot of people who are not from Cumbria saw the message. There was sorry about the jets, it's one of those downsides. It was also a campaign that saw leafleting in several towns, fly posting in several towns, and certainly in Keswick, those of us that did the leafleting here, we had as probably more conversations with tourists who were very supportive of our campaign, many of whom were not aware that there was going to possibly be a new coal mine in Cumbria, who were appalled that the government was thinking of doing it. So, as I said, it's on one level, the speakers' corners are educative, but on another level, as well as spreading the message, they do have another or at least another function. Tony mentioned about when you asked him whether he was pessimistic or optimistic, he said at the moment he was feeling more optimistic. And that's one of the things that comes from events like the Speakers' Corners. And we got it with the Green Mondays at Preston New Road against fracking, that as people come together, get out of their houses and start talking to other people who are concerned about, is a kind of morale boost. And we had a brilliant morale boost in August, not just what the XR North Lakes and XR South Lakes did with the banners, but I don't know if you heard, but Earth First rocked up on the mine site on, I think it was the 29th of August, and they set up a climate camp as part of their summer gathering 2023. And they stayed there until Monday of this week. And there were quite a lot of local people who, out of curiosity, I think, to start with, to see what these almost like alien species for some people in West Cumbria looked like and what they had to say. And what was good is that some of our anti-mine campaigners actually held a workshop for the Earth First people about why we were campaigning against the coal mine and the problems and so on. And as a result of that, we have now made links with Earth First. And not only are they going to come and try and support some of our future Speakers' Corners, but they're also going to help spread the message, if you like, on their networks, which is what we need to do. What it's beginning to do is, instead of just a small group of people gathering outside the mine site once a month and then disappearing, it's coming more into the local news, and it's beginning to get on the national radar as well. And the more people that get involved, the more people that get concerned, as we saw with the Green Mondays, the more people you potentially have who are prepared to say at a certain point, especially if the mine gets the go-ahead and we lose the court cases, well, maybe we need to step up what we're doing, and we need to do more than door knocking and leafleting and having monthly meetings where we hear people say why this mine is a bad idea and what kind of better jobs we could have. So But obviously you don't want to talk too much about that in the public domain, because you never know if Big Brother is listening. Well, you know they do, don't you?
Caminante no hay camino, o sea, se camino al andar.
I would say this is one of those examples where the trickle-down theory does actually work. I started using the term at the Green Mondays of the Magic 50. If we got more than 50 people turning up who had heard all of the reasons why the fracking was something that shouldn't be happening, and they begin to see some people taking peaceful, direct action, like sitting down, standing in front of lorries, blocking the gates, etc., it kind of pulls people in, because they begin to get the confidence that maybe they could do something. It might not be as dramatic as actually locking on or sitting down in front of a lorry, but for instance, it wouldn't be totally unexpected if the mine does go ahead and work starts on the site, that the tactic that Just Stop Oil has been using a lot recently of slow marching is something that it won't stop the trucks getting in and out of the site, but it will slow them down. And again, that was one of the tactics that we used at Preston New Road, and I know was used by lots of other anti-fracking campaigns. The more you slow it down, the more money the company loses. And there comes a point, and this did happen with Quadrilla, when they're not making a profit and they go back to the banks and say, can we have some more money? The banks in the end turned around to Quadrilla and said no, because they weren't making any money on the money they'd already been lent. And so it's a much bigger thing than just saying, we're going to go there once a month and we're going to listen to people who know what they're talking about and say, oh yes, it is a bad thing. And then you go home and wait for the next lot of speakers. It has a trickle down effect, a cumulative effect. And I think the Earth First action was interesting, because that was the first real direct action in connection with the coal mine that we've seen here. And a lot of people involved in our campaign went across. I went across with a friend and took a load of Greg's vegan sausage rolls and Mexican bakes, which went down. But it's establishing these links. And this Saturday, we've got, because we're resuming this Saturday with the monthly week speakers corners, we've got a speaker from the Weald Action Group who have lodged their campaign, and we've got people from the Pont Valley campaign who had their successful struggle against coal mining there. And it's making these connections and seeing what we can learn from them and how it can help us do a more effective campaign here, which obviously, if we lose the court case, we obviously got to do a lot more than just hear people say, oh, this is a bad thing and let's go home again.
And that's a good note, I think, to finish on. We're kind of out of time, but that's really, really interesting. And I think it's something that even for the campaigns here in Scotland too is really worth learning from, the whole, those combination of those different tactics and things. So thanks very much. Yes, of course.
Yeah, just one thing, without mentioning anybody's names. When we were doing the Green Mondays, there was one person in particular who was very, very supportive and very knowledgeable about why fracking was such a bad thing, but was not prepared to do any direct action. Just came to listen and well, in fact, they spoke. And when XR began, this person came down with me and others and was prepared to hand out leaflets, but was not prepared to block bridges or roads or anything. Well, this person, having seen other people do it over it took this person a couple of years or so to do it, but they are now facing 3 court cases, one after the other, because of actions that they've done, not with XR, but with Just Stop Oil. And that even if only a few out of the people who come to hear these things are emboldened eventually to do that, then that's where you begin to be able to step up what you do to stop a project that should never, ever happen.
Indeed, thank you very much. That's worth pointing out too, Allan. Thank you so much. We are out of time, but thank you very much for watching. We've been talking to Allan Todd in Keswick about the campaign against the Cumbria coal mine. That's all for this episode of Rising Clyde. I'm Ian Bruce in Glasgow. Until next time.
Goodbye from Keswick.
I say, Camino, Allan, I say, Camino, Allan, down.